Chiara is 13, and in her poem she imagines herself looking in the mirror in these terms. Here I stand, looking at the cold sheet of glass, watching a stranger mimic my every move. I think of all the time spent trying to create the perfect face of beauty, to no avail. What was the point? Why the waste of time? Why the waste of effort? I realise now that I'm perfect in my imperfection. I am, we all are, what God intended. We're his creation. Through his Spirit we live. We are him, and he is us. Imago Dei, the image of God. Now, I love this poem because here a girl of 13 shows us something that is often of extreme importance to young people of 13. And she shows us it in the light of a core Christian concept, the idea that humans are created in the image of God. My guess is she's probably been learning that concept in her religious education lessons. That's a lot more likely than that she's learned it in church. And actually, she applies the concept with such brilliant insight. Now, I know that all of you lot, being, what shall we say, looking round to your average age a little older than 13, maybe 21 already. And actually, what's happening here, we're a bit more adjusted perhaps to, I've learned to live with the boldness over the years. I'm okay with that now. But that almost obsessive concern about the real me and the how I'm seen, which Chiara uses there, it's the spiritual engagement that enables her to see beyond what's in the mirror. Do you notice, I made the point this morning that actually the young people's spirituality is often functioning and flowing at depths we can hardly imagine. Not everyone can write poetry like Chiara, but for everyone who can, there's 100 more who are thinking about the same kind of issues. And that's why I really wanted to read you Patrick Corley's poem. He's only 8, would you believe, but his poem is called Searching for God, Hide and Seek. I counted to 10, and then I looked behind the office door on the top floor for half an hour. I searched the shower, then the cupboard under the stairs, but he wasn't there. I checked behind the sofa and out in the street, but if he'd been outside, he would have been a cheat. I looked under the table and under the bed, then I checked the bathroom instead. I looked in the mirror, and what did I see? Then I realised, maybe he is in me. Should I look for him in my heart? Okay, let's make a start. And actually, Patrick's brilliant rhyme scheme, well, the brilliance of his rhyme scheme is exceeded, is it not, by the brilliance of his understanding that the place to seek God is inside. And of course, there's 4 dimensions to the spiritual life. Talked about those this morning. But actually, the first place that most of us look and begin to find the divine revealed is in ourselves. Okay, so those 2 poems, I like those because they're united by the metaphor of the mirror. You notice how Chiara used the mirror to kick her poetry off, and what young Patrick does with the mirror there. I looked in the mirror, and what did I see? And those 2 are perhaps good reminders, because I've got a few questions that I've made a note of during the day. I feel I've missed so much, but actually these might be energy for you. I've got a little story to tell you as well, so I'll put the questions up and say a word or 2 about each, and then the story, and then the questions will come back. First of all, I loved Sue's stuff this morning about not until the loom is silent. You don't know the impact of the work you do through prayer spaces in schools. You can't see it. It's a future impact. And is it okay, therefore, to aim just for those unseen long-term outcomes? That's also interesting that on the prayer spaces in schools literature, it says that we're about evidence of spirituality as well as about spiritual development. And that's a very interesting and attractive idea to schools, that having a prayer space gives evidence of the spiritual life of pupils in the school. So is it also important to see some evidence of impact of the work that we do? And then I talked this morning a little bit about theology of prayer, and I want this question to linger with us here. Does prayer spaces in school enable authentic prayer? I'm a Christian person, I'm interested in prayer, I think more prayer is good. Does prayer space in school enable the encounter with God? I think the answer to that is emphatically can do yes. And I challenge you there because I think the activities we devise and the way we host, the way we welcome, the way we lead, that's actually what decides whether what happens is interesting, reflective activity or if it enables an actual possibility of an encounter with God. And then that's interesting this afternoon, lovely to hear Rolf's reflection on maintaining a clear and firm Christian identity, even in the multi-faith context there. And I want that question to be one that we think more about as well. God is one, religions are many. Does your prayer space in schoolwork set no boundary to inclusion? You don't want it just to be for Christians, do you? You want it to be for everybody. How can we work to make sure that that is practically true? And then I'm interested in this idea of nurturing human spirituality. And I wonder if you have a model to apply there from today so that your prayer space in schoolwork offers something for the inner, for the other, for the earth, for the beyond. Then notice in that last discussion session that there were a number of pegs, I'll call them pegs, on which prayer spaces in school gets hung, sometimes by senior school leaders or governors or religious education teachers. If you're a school visitor, then those pegs are very important and useful. They're like the way into the school. They give you a place to be within the school's life. And those, they vary, okay? Some of what we're offering has a relationship to counselling, or to the school's values, or to the well-being of pupils, or to the spiritual, moral, social, cultural dimension of what inspectors look for, or to that pupil voice, student voice connection. If pupils ask for it, if student asks for it, college leadership jumps, and they only ask how high. No one's mentioned yet the promotion of British values. But actually, there's a new peg. And actually, I like all the pegs that I can hang some religious education and spirituality work on. And that's actually a very new, posh, strong, carefully nailed to the wall peg. I wonder if those actually sum up all the contributions we make, though. I don't think so. I think there's something beyond any of those pegs that prayer spaces in schools offers. So as you work to define and refine what you're playing at, what you're doing when you offer schools a prayer space, that's worth thinking about. I think that the question, there's a bubbling question that's been there all day about winning the school's trust. And what I think about that is that honesty and transparency are essential. Let's not have any hidden agendas there. Let's not pretend to the school that we're doing something that Ofsted require, but in our own hearts and minds believe we're doing something completely different. Let's work hard to get those together. And actually service is at the heart of this as well. The Prayer Spaces in Schools movement has become rather good at saying to schools, we think that this might be of service. That's a very Jesus-ish thing to be doing, to be of service to a local school community. Just to tease you with a story then, this story is about how peace grows. I interviewed Jim Wallace when he was in Britain last year. He's an activist in the US from a Christian perspective. It was great fun interviewing him. He's been arrested 22 times for his activism. And I said to him, my first question, I was quite pleased with us. What's your favourite arrest then, Jim? He said, oh, well, actually, I've got 3 favourite arrests, and told me about his 3 favourite arrests. But he told me this story, which I want to pass on to you, because I think if you think hard about this story, it will shed some light on some of the issues we've discussed today. In America, of course, and in the papers and on TV, you get the impression that Islam and Christianity are opponents, even opposite religions, I've heard them called. But this is interesting. Prophet Muhammad said, Christians and Muslims should be the nearest in affection. It's not what you see at the moment, is it? So I wonder what you think can make peace between Muslims and Christians, how peace can grow. Jim Wallace tells this story, and I'll put this little PowerPoint on the Prayer Spaces website. You can pick that up if you want to. And the story starts, of course, with American anti-Islamic feeling triggered by the events of 9/11 in 2001. A big date in the USA, and obviously it was a deeply un-Islamic thing to do, but many Muslims are targeted for hostility in the US because of that strong anti-Muslim feeling. So I'm asking children, young people, how you think that shows and whether we see it in the UK, and I'm pretty sure we do. Did you know this, that the state of Tennessee passed a law recently that said that there was to be no Sharia law in Tennessee? Not that that was really a very lively possibility with the Muslim population of Tennessee being well below the 1% mark, but they passed the law anyway just to put a marker down. And Steve Stone is pastor of Heartsong Methodist Church in Memphis and learned that the Memphis Islamic Center had bought land just by his church. And he wondered what he ought to do about that. So I wonder what you think his options might be. what might a Methodist minister do with the Muslims moving in next door? What he actually did was put up an outside the church notice that said, Heartsong Church welcomes Memphis Islamic Centre to the neighbourhood. And a few days later, he got a knock on the door, and there was 3 Muslim blokes outside that said, I don't know you really, Mr. Stone, but thank you very much for putting that message up. We were hoping we would be ignored. This is rather better than we'd hoped for. So when Ramadan time came, the Muslim community didn't have a building, and they said to Steve, could we, you've got a little room in your basement, could we use that? And again, Steve's got options there, but what he decided to do was actually to give them the biggest room he had. And he made a friendship between his Methodist Christian community and these Muslim community of Memphis, Tennessee. And they serve always now halal food at a barbecue so that Muslim neighbours can come and join them and be happy with that. And they run a couple of joint projects. Now, Jim Wallace kind of knew about this, and he was in conversation with CNN, the news network, and CNN said to him, oh, we don't have any good news Muslim stories because we don't know any. Which is disgraceful, isn't it, really, because they're journalists, so what are they supposed to be doing? Finding stories, I think. Anyway, Jim said to them, well, why don't you go and film Steve's church, because they have barbecues of halal food between Christians and Muslims, and you might be interested in that. So they did. And you know how CNN run a 90-second loop? They made a 90-second film from Heartsong Methodist Church, and they put it on the loop, and it was on the telly for a day. And actually, really interesting that what happened after that was that 7,500 miles away, in a little community in Kashmir, there was a dozen Muslim blokes who always had morning coffee together and watched the telly. And they saw the news item, and when it had finished, one of them just turned the telly straight off, and they sat in silence, because they'd never seen anything like that before, in which Christians were nice to Muslims. And one of them said, God just spoke to us through this man. And another one said, how can we try to kill these people when they give a welcome like that? And there was a tiny Christian church in their Kashmiri community, which had graffiti all over it saying Christians out. And one of them went to the church and washed it inside and out. And would you believe there, Steve Stone is at home when the phone rings a few days later. Somebody, you don't know me, but I'm phoning you from Kashmir. And it's this bloke saying to him, well, we watched CNN, we saw what you did, and we're going to try and be good neighbours just like you. Would you tell your congregation, we don't hate them, we love them. And for the rest of our lives, we're going to try and be as good neighbours to the tiny Christian community here in Kashmir as you have been to the community in Tennessee. Now, I'm offering no interpretations of that story today, okay? I think the story stands alone. It's been sat in my head since Jim Wallace told it to me over a year ago. And it's made me think pretty hard about 3 Christian principles. The first one is a principle of service. What should you do for anyone in need? See if you can serve. The second is a Christian principle of inclusion. I believe that God is great and his love extends to everybody, those who come to the prayer space and those who don't, those who come to the prayer space and use it, and those who come and rather trash it, or rather make a mess of it. God's inclusive love extends to and beyond all of those. And that's a principle of service and a principle of inclusion. And the third and most important of all is a principle of love. And actually, if the prayer spaces in school that you run put the principle of Christian love into action, then there is genuinely no limit to what God might do as a result of them. That's me lot.